Marriage Champions! I'm Amy Morgan, the feature writer for the San Antonio Marriage Initiative. I am so delighted today to introduce you to Suzanne Venker. She is an author, researcher, commentator, life coach, wife, and mother of 2 young adult children. She also advocates for marriage and family. Suzanne's written 5 books and hosts a weekly podcast with numerous national thought leaders like Dr. James Dobson. She's spoken boldly on The View, Tucker Carlson Tonight, and Fox and Friends, where she advocates traditional values counter to culture, including women placing marriage and motherhood before career. Her newest book is out this month. It's How to Get Hitched and Stay Hitched. I got this just yesterday, last evening, in fact, and this is what I've done with it in one day. It is full of great stuff. So I am really excited to share it with you. Suzanne, thank you so much for being here. I'm just delighted to talk to you.
Thanks for having me, Amy. This is fun.
Oh, great. Well, let's start with the book. What inspired you to write it?
Oh my gosh. So, I have just been marinating in these issues that are in this book, sex, marriage, dating, motherhood, for years. And in the last several years, I have been coaching, and I can see up close and personal in a way that I wasn't before. Before, it was pretty much research-based, self-help, my own experiences and whatnot in my past books. In the last several years, I put that into coaching, and wow, to see up close what is happening just gives you a completely different view of it, and it's heart-wrenching. So I just felt like, okay, we have got to deal with these very difficult subject. I don't see them as difficult. I guess the culture sees them as difficult because everything that I teach is countercultural. So we talk about things in this book, of course, that are very counterculture, and that's really the meat of the book.
Yeah. Well, to me, it rang so true to me, but I'm more your contemporary generation.
Yeah.
And these girls, I see examples, we still at our age, we still pretty much thought we were going to get married, and we wanted to get married, and we wanted to have kids, and kind of thought, yes, career too, but we kind of had those priorities a little more set for us. But now the girls, that seems to just be thrown out the window. Can you tell us a little bit about what you see, and then we'll talk about the book and how it addresses those issues?
So look, at the end of the day, what I'm dealing with, or what I'm seeing, are the women who were groomed to put their career front and center, and to forget about marriage and motherhood, to forget about love and family, to forget about even creating a relationship that lasts until later. It's not working. And we need to talk about why that doesn't work. And that is so much about what this book is about. We have to talk about that dreaded age of 30, where everything starts to change for women. It's a very difficult thing to talk about because the idea, according to the culture, is that men and women are the same, right? They're interchangeable. There's no differences really. So you teach your daughters to map out their lives the same way you teach your sons to map out theirs, as though there are no differences between them, which is crazy to me, right? Women's bodies do something that men's don't, right? They have a foreshortened time frame in which to get their lives in order. And you have to have a different structure for that than a man would, based on your priorities, for sure. And then also understanding the differences between men and women, and how mate selection works, and sexual marketability, and that the older you get as a woman, it's not the same as the older you get for a man, because, again, as difficult it is to talk about because it's not trendy, men become more marriageable as they become more stable in their career, right? The more financially stable they are, the more of a catch they are. That's not the case for women, because that's not what men are looking for from women when they go to marry. And that's the hard part. Nobody wants to talk about that.
Yeah, I highlighted that in your book about what you were talking about. And we had that conversation too. And this is kind of part of your why, about a woman in the 30s that you have experienced in your coaching practice, that they're making decisions right there based on that biological clock. Do you want to address that a little bit and kind of unpack that for us?
Yeah, basically what my argument is in this book is, look, the priorities that you have at 32 are in no way the same as what you have at 22. And you need to know this from the get-go and assume something, even if it doesn't end up that you're like most women, you're best off to assume that you will be, because most women do bump up against that biological clock and want to have a family. And for many of them, they're looking around going, where are all the good men? Thinking that they can look for a man at that stage of life in the same way that they could have at 23, 24, 25. So, and again, this book is not meant to be, it's supposed to be focused and helpful toward the younger you are, the better it is to get your hands on the book. That's true. But I certainly have people that come to me for coaching and they are around 30, 31, 32. And it's not like I say, well, forget it now. It's not, that's not the point. It's just easier. And it's just no question. The number one thing that I get from people over and over again, the common theme is, I wish I had known this 10 years ago. That's why I wrote the book.
Well, let's start with the book. You start with 4 lies the culture tells women. How about you talk to us about what those lies are? Because that's important. We got to know what they are in order to know how to fix them.
So just FYI for people, the book is broken up into 2 parts. Part 1 is the 4 lies the culture tells. Part 2 is the 12-step program, which we'll get to that in a minute. That's the bulk of the book. And you can find out this information on my website right now at SuzanneVenker.com, where underneath the section on how to get hitched in that book landing page, there's actually a page to the 12-step program and the 4 lies. So it's all there for you to see. You don't have to wonder when we're done here, because we're going to go through this kind of quickly, I guess. So the 4 lies: sex is just sex. Never depend on a man. Marriage plus motherhood equals jail. And career success will and should define you. So those are the narratives that most young women are raised with today. And if it didn't come directly from their parents, although it very often does, it absolutely comes from every possible media source they can get their hands on. And of course, now, today, that's different from 20 years ago, because it's on your phone and it's just coming at you all the time. And it could be in the form of a show that you like, your favorite show on Netflix, or it can be a headline in the news, whatever it is. And you're, of course, on college campuses, you're getting pummeled with it. But the idea is that these 4 lies have essentially ruined women's chance for happiness. That's my argument. And that if you believe the lie, the more you believe those lies and build a life based on them, the more you're going to end up calling me 10 years down the line, which I don't want, which some might sound funny, but I really don't want you to. What I want is for you to, I want to help you construct a life that works, because this is so unnecessary. This is all a political scheme, if you will. It's a political, you're mapping out a life according to a political goal that does not match, that's not going to work well for you. It's just going to serve the political means. And this isn't a political book. I don't get into that. I'm just saying it's very important to understand that you're following advice from people who have an agenda, but it's going to hurt your life. And I don't want that for you, because why would you do that? There's no reason to do that. There's another way. So that's what this book is about.
Well, and in the book too, you give some examples of real life people that have talked to you, and they said, even, they realized, wait, I had all this education. Someone even was browbeating a woman who said, you have all this education, you spent all this time and money, maybe even taxpayer money, if you got scholarships, and now you just want to have a baby. And she was replying in that she didn't even realize how much she actually wanted to take care of her child. She didn't even think that she would, but she did. And that's common.
Yeah, that's very common, because there is so little information about how miraculous and life-changing and wonderful it is to have a baby and to experience those years, those early years especially. Many women are just, they're pummeled with these feelings that no one warned them for, and they prepared for a different kind of life. And of course, they're told forever, you can never stay home. Nobody can do that. You need 2 incomes. So, well, if you think that from the get-go, then all the decisions that you're making up to giving birth are going to actually create a self-fulfilling prophecy. For example, you're not necessarily going to look for a man who's stable financially, because, well, you're going to earn money too. So that's not really of paramount importance anymore. Or you make decisions based on 2 incomes instead of 1 prior to having a child, then getting stuck later on. And you really do have to work to pay off that house you shouldn't have bought because you didn't base it on one income, that kind of thing. So these are all real life examples of what happens based on having believed these lies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which again come from everywhere. They're permeate our culture. What you said.
I was just going to say, and initially, you know, there's a big conversation around feminism with this whole thing, because that's really where it emanates, because that's the agenda that's at play. But the reality is, it really doesn't matter how you vote. This is in the culture and in your brain, and you've absorbed it no matter where you are on the political spectrum. You know, I have a lot of people who say, how do you even find people who haven't absorbed these lies? Because even Christian women have, right? It's really in the churches as well. So it's just everywhere. And so in order to get it out of you, this was my argument in the book, you're going to need a detox, right? And that's what this book is about. It's about a detox away from these lies onto a roadmap and a path that actually does work.
Well, tell us about that. You led us just right into that. I'm eager to hear.
I don't know that we'll have time to go through the entire 12-step program, but just as a reminder to people, I actually have this now on my site on a landing page under the 12-step program, so you can get the rest of the information there if we don't get to all of it. So the very first step that I put there is called Live an Examined Life.
Yes.
And I would love to ask you, Amy, what you got from that chapter, since you just read it. How would you sum it up, just as a reader? I'm curious. And you don't worry about butchering it or anything. I'm just curious about what you got from it.
No, I think it was being not just stumbling along, but really thinking about what you wanted in life, and then looking at how to get there, making a strategy and a plan. I can go back and see which of my tabs I might have had a good tab there too.
Awesome.
But that is because I think a lot of people, they do think, okay, I'm going to do this because this was my dream. I wanted to be, a doctor or whatever, and I'm going to go to school or XYZ, and they don't even think about what their life might look like if they were a doctor.
10 years, 15, 20 years down the road.
Yeah. And not to say that being a doctor isn't wonderful. And there are a lot of wonderful doctors, and there are a lot of wonderful opportunities now for women to do, there's a pediatric practice here in San Antonio where a lot of the women are part-time, and they shuffle it around, and they have wonderful families, but that, I don't know that that's the norm.
No. And so, so look, you can live one of two lives, right? An examined life or an unexamined one. And the unexamined one is when you move through the world mindlessly, just doing whatever everybody else seems to be doing, because quite frankly, if that's human nature, people do that. It's like more normal to do that than to not. The problem is that the culture's steering you in the wrong direction. Next thing you know, it's bumping up against what you want. So really the question of this book is, what do you want? Because at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. What kind of life do you want? You have to think about that, not with respect to what other people think or are doing, but what you want. That's what this book is about. Examine who you are, what you really want, and avoid all that chatter in your midst that's coming at you, and really get focused. So that whole first chapter is just basically how to ignore those voices that you're hearing and get in touch with what you want.
Yeah. Well, in fact, we were talking earlier, and you were saying truly that this book is less about marriage and more about how to create a life that works. And for anyone, male or female, really, creating a life that works starts exactly with that self-reflection.
Absolutely. It is so much more. I mean, it's called How to Get Hitched and Stay Hitched, but actually the subtitle, A 12-Step Program for Marriage-Minded Women, might be more pertinent than the title itself, because it's really not about marriage per se. It's about how to structure a life that's going to work for you if you're a woman who wants to get married and have children someday. That's it. Or if you're older and you still want to get married and have children, you're in your 30s, that too. It's also, and I specify it for women as opposed to men, specifically because of what we were saying before. Men and women are different. Women's bodies do something that men's don't. And that means they have to consider that and understand how they're going to respond to becoming a mother, how the biological urges that they're going to have. I mean, both men and women have this biological desire at some point to have a family, but it's far more urgent in women when they hit around 30 for the obvious reason. They give birth and men don't. So men have more time. They just do. Don't take that up with me. I didn't make it that way, right? We just have to accept it and work with the biology we've been given. So that's why it's focused on women.
Well, I don't know if we'll have time to do all the 12 steps, but I know you had some favorites. So how about you hit some highlights?
Okay. One of them is don't rely on love alone. And I think this is kind of a hot button topic because really that's all young people do here is love, 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 love. You turn on the TV, you read stories, and everything's about, well, if I just love them, and it's all about how you feel. And it's very taboo to talk about marriage as being any kind of, I don't know, business arrangement, right? Or being more practical in matters of the heart. We just like to go with our hearts. But the reality is we've been doing that and it's not working.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, hey, the reality is marriage is a partnership. It is a business. You have to kind of think of it like that. And there are things to consider outside of whether or not you just love the person.
Yeah.
It's just not enough. It's just not enough. And we just don't talk enough about that. So in that book, I talk about the other things that are going to take precedence over the love, because the love and those feelings of being in love are going to ebb and flow over time. And you're going to go through phases and seasons. And what's going to make the marriage work at the end of the day isn't your feelings of love today, but your goals, your priorities, your values, your plans, how you're going to work out your day-to-day life. There's just so much more than love. So that's what that chapter focuses on. I don't know if you had a particular favorite or not, or I can just bring up another one.
You can bring, but I thought it was interesting in just what you were saying about talking about the practical realities of life. You have been married for decades. You have, young adult children, both a boy and a girl, and I've been married for decades. And so again, it's ringing true. We're both nodding, going, yeah, it takes that practical, you're a team. Everyone has roles, everyone has jobs and to make a family work. And you're speaking from experience when you're writing this too.
Yeah, and I wrote, I was married before, which when I was in my 20s, early 20s, married, 4 years, no kids. And I mentioned that in there. And I talk about the reason why that chapter even came to be is because that was a relationship based on love, exclusively on love. There was no lack of love. That wasn't the issue. There were just a lot of other ones. And I, at the time, thought love will take care of it, right? I'll just love him enough to make this thing work, right? And men are a little more practical. Typically, that's more of a woman thing. And so been there, done that, doesn't work. So that's where that chapter came from. Another one that I think is really important is rejecting the green grass syndrome. And what that just means is that's all about the crippling nature of comparisons. Yeah. And how looking at what's going on in other people's relationships and in other people's lives, which was not common for you and me as much as it is today with social media. I can't even imagine being in my 20s or 30s today. I just cannot. I cannot. It's just upsetting to me because it's so destructive to your relationship. The bottom line is you've got to stay focused, stay in your own lane, stay focused on your relationship. There's always going to be other relationships that look different, look better, but they're not necessarily better. They just look better from a distance. And if you got in on this inside of that relationship, you'd see just as many warts over there that you have on yours. So this idea of dreaming that you can have something better and these high expectations that women have, that's a really big thing. I did a video once, I don't know if it was a podcast or just a video on YouTube about high expectations and just got pummeled because the idea that you should not have stars in your eyes with just the greatest expectations because you deserve it as a woman is just like, what do you mean I can't do that? I'm not supposed to do that. I'm like, honey, that's the problem. They're way too high and you need to get the focus off of yourself onto what you have to offer and lower those expectations a bit. Just the whole idea of looking over at your neighbor's grass and in this case, it's, bigger than ever in the last 10 years with social media. It's really difficult to watch as a parent too, to see your kids have to deal with that. And I don't really have an answer for technology is here to stay. All I'm saying in this book is stay in your own lane. You are in dangerous territory if you start making comparisons with other people's lives. it's just a no-win situation. You'll end up in a bad place.
Well, and I don't know if this was exactly which one this fit in, but I know that you touched on the idea of that idea of unlimited choices. When you feel like, and maybe it's more on the man side, but when you feel like you have unlimited choices, it's really hard to be satisfied with the one you've chosen.
Yeah, that's in that chapter. So it's all about how to become a satisficer rather than a maximizer. And I point to Barry Schwartz because he wrote a great book called The Paradox of Choice.
Yeah.
And the theme of that is basically too much choice and you develop inertia, right? You can't make one. And then when you do make one, you're less satisfied with it than if you would have been if you just had one of two choices.
Yeah.
And this is something that I think younger people are saddled with that you and I were not. In a way, at least, that you and I were not in our day.
Yeah, I've been see that theme has been coming up just as I've been doing research and talking to different people. That theme, especially with that millennial generation, everything's a swipe. You're
Yeah.
swiping this way or that way, and how would you decide? Why would you decide you would want to go out with this girl or that man when there's just another swipe away from who's the next one that you could see? So
Right, exactly, and that actually carries over into other areas of your relationship because if you the idea that you're basically talking about immediate gratification, and marriages aren't meant to. That's not how it works when you have when you're married with kids, right? It's not immediate gratification. It's more like long haul, right? Long lasting gratification. I mean, it takes years of raising children, hard work before you kind of see the fruits of your labor, and that's just a whole different mindset than young people have.
Yeah.
Which is why I think they struggle, which is part of the reason why I think they struggle with marriage. But that's once they get married, that's kind of a later when they finally do get married.
Well, I know one of the things that I really noticed in the book, and I think it goes back to the four lies, but it was that sex is just sex, because that is not true. And so many people have really, even in the Christian community, that's it. I mean, that's very common.
I consider what we now call the hookup culture, but prior to giving it that name, I used to just refer to it as casual sex like 15 years ago, and somehow that kind of moved into the hookup culture. I consider it to really be the beginning of the end of the relationship between the sexes. That the moment sex became, it's so funny because we had this. There's been a flow here with this whole thing. There was a time when you didn't have sex before you were married, right? And that was the accepted thing. And that was mostly related, well, religious reasons I know, but also respect for marriage. And then birth control wasn't as big as it is now. So once that came into being, then it became, okay, not necessarily waiting for marriage, but at least like in our day, again, I keep saying that, it was understood that you might be with someone prior to marriage, but it was typically the person you ended up marrying, right? It was typically the person that you were already in a very long-term monogamous relationship with. Then that morphed into this mess that we have today of you just have sex with anyone. It's just really no, it doesn't mean that women can have sex like men and get and be able to detach in the same way that men can, which is an outright lie. And women have to learn this the hard way. They're acting like equals to men, thinking I'm empowered, this is empowering or something, and then they find themselves reacting emotionally in a way that they hadn't anticipated and not being able to really figure out why that is. Or some people will just insist that they can do it, but it's a very rare woman that can do that. It has caused untold damage over the last 20 or 30 years. It's really horrific because there's nothing casual about sex. And I think I had a great quote from Jordan Peterson in there when he was doing his thing a couple years ago. And it, people play with it like it's casual, but it's not. And it's very serious business. And of course, he did a much better explanation than I did as to why that is. But yeah, it's just not. And so that whole mindset has to actually be taught to the younger generation because they've literally not gotten it from anyone that sex is serious business. And here's how to, well, for example, I had a coaching client who was, I think 30, 31, 32. She'd been divorced once, no kids. She really wanted to get married and have a family. I would like to say she's now married with baby on the way. But at the time, she was dating this guy, and she was trying to figure out whether or not, they were on the same page with what they wanted. And I said, here's your number one way you're going to do that. You tell him right off the bat, I'm not having sex. Sex is off the table, right? I'm not having sex. Or however she phrased it, it was, I'm not going to be here. This is not flippant. I'm not going to have sex with you. This is what I'm looking for. It's bottom line. So she ended up telling him that. He's like, okay. And then he stuck around for another date. And the next thing you know, he's out the door because clearly he didn't want that, which people say that to me. They're like, well, I can't not do that because everybody's doing that. So the guy will just go to where he can get some. And I said, okay, great.
Let him go.
Person, right? People have got to start when they're dating, getting on the table what it is they're looking for right up front, whether you're 25 or 35. Be honest, not necessarily the first date, but within the first couple of dates, you should be getting to know each other anyway. You should not be sleeping together. You should be letting each other know who you are and creating to see if there's something there. And that takes endless conversation and interaction that should at some point include what it is you're looking for. And that's not how people date today.
Yeah.
And so they're not getting what they ultimately are wanting because they're playing games and not doing it the way that works.
Well, and I really think too, the way to get some, you have to buy in. You have to get people to buy into what you're saying to hopefully change behavior. Mm-hmm. And so hopefully your book is showing some of the downsides of cultural behavior that is prevalent and inspiring people to move back to the more values that actually worked.
Yeah, right.
It actually worked.
And that's what's going to be interesting. I mean, look, progress is fine and good. I'm all for progress, but not just for progress's sake. There are aspects of life that simply are static and don't change. And the most obvious is human nature. And there's a way that men and women interact in general. Obviously, everybody's different, but there's a way that men and women, there's a dance there. And it always works if you do it. And my ultimate message to people is, look, the more you move with the biological tide instead of against it, the more successful you're going to be. And that doesn't mean we go back and you're in these rigid roles. It just means you marry the progress that we have with the facts of human nature that we know don't change. You marry those two things. And don't be afraid to let yourself be a woman and let him be a man in the traditional role way, whether you're talking about sex or what you do on the home front when you're married or whatever, and see how smooth sailing your relationship can be. It's really about fear. It's just, there's so much of this is fear driven because women were sold on the idea, men too, that having different roles means greater, lesser. And that was the lie. Having different functions. I mean, look at the pilot and the co-pilot, right? Or the president and the vice president. They have different functions. And clearly, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're both trying to do the same thing or vie for the same role, you're going to clash. That's just all there is to it. But it's the idea that one is lesser than where the problem comes in. And it's fighting against that mentality that I'll be doing over the coming months to explain it, that actually that was the lie to begin with. The idea that just because you don't do the same things or act the same way or behave differently, that means you're unequal. That's just silly.
Oh, well, I could talk to you all day long about this, Suzanne. This is so interesting and rings so true. And I hope we have so inspired women, young and old, to make a better a life that works and a plan. But we are running out of time and we're going to have to say goodbye. But it was just so great to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy. Really appreciate it. And I love that you marked up the book. That's exactly what it feels like to read the book, I think, because I got to mark this up. There's just a lot in there. There's a lot.
It was great. And Marriage Champions, if you want to connect with us at samarriage.org, that's where you can find us and more about Suzanne.